Hi everybody, Beanmeister22 here. This is my Colombian Dwarf Blue Tarantula, also called a Colombian Blue Dwarf Tarantula, and also called a Colombian Blue Bottle Tarantula. If you haven't guessed, these come from Colombia. It doesn't look very blue now, I mean not at all, but someday it will be blue. But it's a dwarf species, which means it's not going to get overly big, not bigger than 5 inches. And it's going to take forever for it to grow up. After doing some online research, there really wasn't a whole heck of a lot out there about this tarantula. But what I did find out was, sadly, it could take between 1 year and 2 years for this to reach adulthood. So when you get a tarantula because you want it to be big and you want to have a big spider, well, number one, this isn't going to be a big spider, and number two, it's going to take forever for this to become not a big spider. But strangely enough, it's a cool little spider because he is very active, daytime and nighttime. He will either be active out and about in his habitat or active in his lair. Now, I made sure he built his lair right at the edge of the habitat so we could see what's going on in his little spider cave. For a terrestrial burrower tarantula, I am surprised how much time he spends out and about in the habitat. If you remember when we first transferred him to this habitat, he was climbing all upside down on the ceiling and the walls and everything all over it until he decided to dig a den or a lair. Another thing I have found through some research is this is a fairly rare tarantula, and I quote, quite sought after by collectors. How did I end up with him? Well, I looked for a blue tarantula, and it said he was a blue tarantula, so I got him. I just didn't know it would take forever for him to be blue. And like all the spiders we have here, this is not for handling. He can and possibly will bite, and he is a hair flicker. Although hair kicking and hair flicking is not his first offense, he would rather run, then he would rather bite, then he'll flick some hairs at you. As already mentioned, when I set up this temporary habitat for him, and yes, this is a temporary habitat, this is the second one we've had him in. He came in a shipping container, he went into a small habitat, now he has his medium-sized habitat. When I set this up, I purposely anchored the cork bark to the exterior wall so he would tunnel under it and we could see into his lair. This current habitat and the current size of the spider are perfectly matched. Although his lair is starting to take up a fair amount of the habitat space, I should have anchored another suitable piece of cork bark for a lair to be dug underneath it. I don't want to put him in a larger habitat because he is still too small. And as I said, he is perfectly matched size for this habitat. The main reason you don't want to take a small spider and put him in a habitat too large for him is, well, there's a couple reasons, but the main one is he's got to catch his food. He has to eat, and if his habitat is too large, he will have trouble hunting down and eating his prey. You know, you can't make him work too hard for his lunch. And even knowing this point, I think I made that exact mistake with my Mexican fireleg tarantula. His habitat is way too big for him, way too large. He doesn't need that much space. Aside for the occasional time he climbs upside down on the ceiling of his habitat, his 15-gallon tank, aside from that, he spends all of his time underneath his coconut or within a couple inches of his coconut. And no, I don't mean his head. I mean the coconut little house I put in there for him. So I don't intend to make that mistake again. You don't want to rush these things along. They're not goldfish. You know, a goldfish, the larger the tank you have them in, the quicker and larger they will grow. As a kid, I had some of those tiny little feeder goldfish, you know, the ones that are about an inch long, and I put them in a giant tank, and it was within months. They were good-sized carp. Because really, that's all goldfish is a small, cute little carp. It doesn't work the same way with spiders. You can't put a tiny spider in a big house and then think he's just gonna spread out and grow to match his environment. It's not how it works. Like most tarantulas, this guy is pretty nocturnal, but he will be out and about in the daytime too. When you have a tarantula, I guess like all spiders, even though I didn't believe it at first, but when you have a tarantula, it's imperative that they have a water dish. Of all the tarantulas I have only seen this guy and our curly hair actually go up to the water dish and drink. That doesn't mean they're not drinking when I'm not watching, and that's the point. You can't watch them 24 hours a day. But if I see him drinking quite often, and I see the curly hair drinking quite often, how many more times were they there drinking that I didn't see it? And for the spiders that I don't see drinking, they surely are going down and taking a drink, especially when they're thirsty, right? And that also goes for black widow spiders and brown widow spiders. All spiders need a little water dish to drink out of. I didn't know that. That information came from Leo from Leo Kim Video, where he essentially told me, what the heck, how come you don't have a water dish in there for your black widows? And at the same time I was thinking, what the heck, how come you do have a water dish in there for your redback spiders, which are an Australian cousin of the black widow? So Leo set me straight, and yes, all spiders get a tiny water dish. And I say tiny because the black widow spiders don't need much water, they do need some water. Whereas a tarantula, especially when it's bigger, he's going to need a bigger water dish. Common sense, right? Heck, I just figured a black widow spider got all the drinking it needed to and it slurped out the juices of the bug he was eating. I was wrong. And I was set straight. Now when you spritz and moisturize and humatize, is that a word? The inside of their habitats, they will also drink the little droplets of water off the walls. And although all but one of my spiders needs a higher humidity, the cobalt blue tarantula really doesn't need a high humidity, but he certainly still needs water. But for everybody else that also needs a high humidity, you don't want to get their habitat so wet and moist that you have too many little bug larvas squiggling around in there. And you'll see that in a couple of videos. At times when this coconut substrate gets too moist, you'll get little fruit fly larvas will be there. And we have, like I said, we have seen that as we've zoomed in on the spiders. I've read a couple places that you need to have it moister deeper down in the substrate, so the spider can regulate their own humidity by if they need moisture, they can dig deeper. But what you see here is really the perfect amount of moisture in the substrate. And even with as dry as this looks, we're still running 70 to 99% humidity. So there's not really a reason to have your substrate just sopping wet. And as we should have guessed, the lower, longer habitats like this one, for the terrestrial spiders, had the substrate dry out considerably quicker than the taller habitats we have for the arboreal spiders. And really quick, for those of you who are afraid this cork bark is going to fall into the spider layer and squash the spider, I have it glued to the wall of the habitat. When I set these habitats up, I glued the cork bark to the walls, I glued some fake leaves in there, I bought a hot glue gun just to do this, and I intend to do the exact same thing when they go into their larger glass habitats. Although I have no idea how well that hot glue is going to stick to the glass. Alright, so that's our update on our Colombian Dwarf Blue Tarantula, also known as the Colombian Bluebottle Tarantula. And I quote, "He is a cute dwarf species with a grayish body and a distinctive pop of shimmering blue on his abdomen." Yeah, but he ain't got no shimmering blue yet. If you were to see this, you'd think, ew, an icky brown spider. Well, that's what he is. But he's a fun icky brown spider, right? Alright, so leave your comments in the comment section. As always, thanks for watching.
Beanmeister 22, the most dangerous man on YouTube.